Let's dive into something most of us have probably encountered but might not know by name. You ready for this?
Let's hear.
Human Metpneumovirus, or HMPV.
Ah, HMPV. Interesting choice.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive today into this Wikipedia article. And get this, it says pretty much all kids have been exposed to it by the time they're 5 years old. Crazy, right?
Wow, I didn't realize it was that prevalent.
Me neither. It's like hiding in plain sight. It often gets mistaken for a cold, RSV, or even the flu.
Oh, I can definitely see that happening. The symptoms can be so similar.
Exactly. But the thing is, HMPV can actually be pretty serious, especially for, well, the little ones and our older folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Those groups are definitely more vulnerable to complications.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's start with the basics. What exactly is HMPV? Like, what makes it different from a plain old cold or the flu?
So HMPV is a single-stranded RNA virus, meaning it uses a single strand of RNA as its genetic blueprint. You can think of it like a single-sided instruction manual.
Okay, I like that analogy. A single-sided instruction manual for making more virus. Not good.
Right. And it's part of the Pneumoviridae family, which also includes, as you might have guessed, RSV, respiratory syncytial virus.
Right, right. We've talked about RSV before, haven't we?
We have, yeah. In fact, HMPV is really closely related to a virus found in birds, specifically avian metapneumovirus subgroup C.
So it's a bird virus.
Well, it's closely related to one, which makes you wonder, right?
Definitely. How did it end up infecting humans? Did it, like, jump species or something?
Most likely, yeah, though, the exact details of that jump are, well, still being researched. But what we do know is that HMPV has adapted pretty darn well to humans. It's become a major player in the world of respiratory viruses.
Speaking of that jump, I'm curious about how it was actually discovered. If it's been around for so long, why was it only identified in 2001? Like, was it just lurking undetected all that time?
It's pretty likely it was causing, what seemed like common colds or just other mild respiratory illnesses for, well, who knows how long, probably decades, slipping under the radar because we didn't have the tools to actually identify it.
It's like a master of disguise.
Yeah,
Blending in with the crowd.
exactly. It wasn't until some Dutch researchers used a special technique called RAP-PCR, which is designed to detect unknown viruses, that HMPV finally, came out of the shadows.
That's wild. It was hiding in plain sight all along. So this virus is common, it can be pretty nasty, and it was only discovered in the 21st century. Anything else we should know about this sneaky HMPV?
Well, for starters, let's talk about how common it really is. HMPV is, it's found worldwide, and it has a seasonal pattern, typically appearing after the RSV and influenza seasons, so usually in late winter and spring. And here's the kicker. Even though almost everyone gets infected during childhood, reinfections are actually pretty common throughout life.
Wait, reinfections? You're telling me you can get this thing multiple times? I mean, if we're all getting it as kids, you'd think our immune systems would, I don't know how to handle it by then, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? That's one of the big mysteries around HMPV, honestly. For whatever reason, our immune system's memory of this virus just isn't that strong or long-lasting compared to, some other viruses. It's like our bodies don't create a strong enough defense to actually prevent getting it again.
That is kind of unsettling. So we can get it multiple times. It can be serious, especially for certain groups like we talked about. What kind of symptoms are we talking about here?
Well, with HMPV, they can range from, really mild to quite severe. And the tricky part is they often look like, well, other common respiratory illnesses. We're talking cough, fever, runny nose, wheezing, even shortness of breath.
Ugh, that doesn't sound fun.
It's not. And it can mimic a cold, RSV, or the flu, which, well, as you can imagine, makes it hard to diagnose.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, if you're feeling under the weather, it's tough to know exactly what you've got without getting tested.
Pretty much. And that can be a problem, especially when it comes to, protecting those who are at higher risk of getting really sick from it.
Right, you don't want to be spreading it around without knowing. Okay, so we've talked about how common and tricky HMPV can be. Let's get a little deeper into the science behind it. What about its genetic makeup? What can you tell us about that? Time to unpack the blueprints of this virus. I'm ready.
Okay, so the HMPV genome is pretty similar to that of RSV, but there are some key differences. Like, for example, HMPV is missing two genes that are found in RSV. They're called NS1 and NS2.
NS1 and NS2. Catchy names. What do those genes do?
Well, they're known to play a role in basically messing with the host's immune response.
Ah, so they're like little saboteurs.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. And because HMPV doesn't have these genes, it might explain why our immune systems have a tougher time, fighting it off and preventing those reinfections we were talking about. It's like RSV has a couple extra tools to outsmart our defenses.
Interesting. Okay, what else is different about its genome?
Well, the HMPV genome also has 8 open reading frames. These are essentially sets of instructions for building specific proteins.
Okay, like blueprints for the virus's parts.
Exactly. And these reading frames are arranged in a slightly different order than in RSV.
Ah, so even though they're related, these two viruses have their own, like, unique genetic fingerprints.
Exactly. And understanding those differences is super important if we want to figure out, how HMPV replicates, how it interacts with our immune system, and, well, ultimately how we can develop effective treatments and vaccines.
That makes sense. All right, so now that we're starting to understand the blueprint of this virus, let's see how it puts those instructions to work. Tell us about its life cycle. How does this thing actually get into our cells and start replicating?
Okay, so we've got the blueprint, but now I'm kind of curious about how it actually gets into our cells and starts making copies of itself. Like, it's time to, break down the HMPV heist step by step.
Okay, think of it this way, like a well-coordinated break-in. Right?
Oh, like where this is going.
First, HMPV uses this protein called the G protein to attach itself to the host cells, kind of like a grappling hook.
Okay, grappling hook. I'm visualizing it.
Yeah, and it specifically targets those epithelial cells lining our airways.
So it's got a specific target. No random break-ins for this virus, huh?
Exactly. And once it's latched on, it uses another protein called the F protein to fuse its membrane with the host cell's membrane. So it's essentially breaking into the cell.
So it's got its grappling hook, and now it's got its lockpick. Lockpick. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Clever little bugger, isn't it?
Mhm.
But here's where things get a little weird, right? Didn't you say that HMPV doesn't always need that G protein to get in?
You've got a good memory. That is one of the things that makes HMPV stand out from the other viruses in its family. Seems like the F protein, specifically a part of it called the RGD motif, might be playing a bigger role in that whole fusion process.
So it's like it's got a backup plan in case the grappling hook fails?
Mhm.
That's pretty impressive. A little nerving, but impressive.
Yeah.
So, but once it's in, what happens then? Like the virus has got to get down to business, right?
Right. Once it's inside, it releases its genetic material, that single-stranded RNA that we talked about earlier, and it basically hijacks the host cell's machinery to start making copies of itself.
So it's turning our cells into, like, virus factories.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that process, the virus multiplying and spreading, that triggers an inflammatory response in our bodies.
Right, because our bodies are trying to fight back.
Exactly. It's designed to, fight off the invader, but it's also unfortunately responsible for those not so fun symptoms that we experience.
So our own immune system is part of the problem.
In a way, yeah.
That seems a little unfair, don't you think? So let's talk about what we can do to fight back against this virus. Is there any way to actually treat HMPV? Are there any, like, magic bullets out there?
Well, unfortunately, there isn't a specific treatment just for HMPV yet.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Currently, the focus is mostly on managing the symptoms. So things like using over-the-counter medications to, relieve the fever, the congestion, making sure you stay hydrated, things like that.
So pretty much like how we deal with a cold or the flu.
Yeah.
Lots of rest, fluids, over-the-counter meds.
Right. And of course, depending on how severe the illness is, doctors might recommend other supportive care.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about antivirals? I know there are, medications for the flu. Is there anything like that for HMPV?
There has been some research on ribavirin, which is it's an antiviral medication that's used for RSV, and it seems like it might be effective against HMPV, at least in, animal studies. But it hasn't been extensively studied or approved for use in humans with HMPV.
Well, that's kind of a bummer. If ribavirin's already being used for RSV, which is, closely related, you'd think there'd be more research on whether it works for HMPV too, right?
Yeah.
Any idea why that hasn't been more of a priority?
It's hard to say for sure. Could be a lot of factors, right? Maybe the focus has been more on developing vaccines, which could potentially, offer more long-lasting protection. Or it's possible that because HMPV was only discovered relatively recently, that, the research efforts are still catching up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so speaking of vaccines, any good news on that front? Any hope for an HMPV vaccine on the horizon?
There is some good news. Several companies are actually working on developing an HMPV vaccine. Moderna is, I think they're one of the front runners.
Moderna, huh? They've been
Yeah.
busy lately.
They have. As of, I think it was 2019, their vaccine candidate showed some pretty promising results in phase 1 trials. Like, it seemed to be safe and was able to trigger an immune
Oh,
response.
wow. That's encouraging. A vaccine would be a total game changer, especially with how common and potentially serious this virus is. Fingers crossed it won't be too long before we have, an effective vaccine to add to our arsenal.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, prevention is still key, right?
Absolutely. The same good hygiene practices that we're all, pretty familiar with for preventing the spread of colds and flu, they all play to HMPV too.
Okay, so washing our hands, covering those coughs and sneezes.
Exactly. And trying to avoid close contact with, with people who are sick. It can go a long way in protecting ourselves and others.
So the classic common sense strategies, nothing too groundbreaking there. All right, so now that we've talked about treatment and prevention, I want to step back in time for a bit.
Yeah.
When did HMPV first appear on the scene? Is it a relatively new virus, or has it been, lurking around for centuries?
Well, based on what we know now, it seems like it's been circulating for a lot longer than we initially thought. Estimates suggest it probably emerged sometime between 1875 and 1889.
Ooh, so it's over a century old. That's older than I expected. But if it's been circulating for that long, how come it took us until, what was it, 2001 to identify it?
Well, remember, we haven't always had, the sophisticated tools that we have now to actually identify viruses.
Right.
It's very likely that for decades, HMPV was just causing what seems like ordinary colds or other mild respiratory illnesses. It was probably just blending in with all the other viruses.
So it was hiding in plain sight this whole time.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But it didn't, just magically appear out of thin air, did it? Didn't we talk about it being related to that bird virus earlier?
Right. HMPV is thought to have diverged from avian metapneumovirus, that bird virus, sometime around 1800. So at some point, it likely jumped from birds to humans and then started adapting to its new host.
Another case of a zoonotic virus. Fascinating, but also kind of creepy when you think about how these viruses can, cross species barriers. Makes you wonder what other viruses are out there just waiting to, make that jump. But I do have a question about this whole evolutionary timeline. If HMPV diverged from avian metapneumovirus around 1800, but it wasn't identified until 2001, does that mean it wasn't actually causing any problems for 200 years?
Not necessarily. It's totally possible that it was circulating in the human population during that time, causing, illnesses, but they were just attributed to other causes, like the common cold. Remember, for a lot of human history, we didn't really understand viruses and their role in disease.
That's like HMPV was a ghost in the machine, just quietly causing trouble without us even knowing it was there. But speaking of causing trouble, I can't ignore that the 2024-2025 outbreak section in the article. Sounds pretty serious. What can you tell us about this recent outbreak?
So this recent outbreak, mainly in East Asia, has been, it's been pretty concerning. HMPV has actually been more prevalent than other common respiratory viruses, like COVID-19, rhinovirus, and adenovirus.
Wait, hold on. You're saying HMPV is outpacing COVID-19 right now?
It is, yeah. It really highlights how much potential this virus has to cause, significant outbreaks and its overall impact on public health.
That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And it seems like this outbreak is mostly affecting children, which, makes sense given what we know about HMPV and how it tends to target those younger age groups.
Okay, so this is definitely something to be concerned about. Any thoughts on what's driving this surge in cases? Is it just bad luck, or are there other factors at play?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but there are a few possibilities. One theory is that all those measures we've been taking to prevent COVID-19, like masking and social distancing, may have also, unintentionally suppressed the spread of other respiratory viruses, including HMPV. And now that those measures are being relaxed, we could be seeing a resurgence of these viruses as they, sort of play catch up.
So it's like we were holding HMPV back without even realizing it, and now it's making a comeback.
It's possible, yeah. And it's a good reminder that, the world of viruses is it's complex. What affects one virus can definitely have ripple effects on others. And I think this outbreak really underscores how important ongoing surveillance is. We really need to be actively monitoring for new outbreaks and tracking the evolution of this virus to be better prepared for what it might throw at us next.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about HMPV's history, how it infects us, the symptoms, how it's treated, and this recent outbreak. I feel like we're still, just scratching the surface of this sneaky little virus. Anything else in the article that you think our listeners should know about?
Well, there is one more thing about HMPV that I find particularly interesting, and that's how it interacts with our immune system. It's really this kind of complex dance between, you know, attack and defense. And the more we understand it, the better equipped we'll be to, to develop some effective strategies to actually combat this virus.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell us about this microscopic battle between HMPV and our immune system.
Welcome back to our deep dive on human metapneumovirus. I feel like we've gone pretty deep here.
We have. It's a fascinating virus, that's for sure.
It is. So before we wrap things up, you mentioned something about, the interaction between HMTV and our immune system, something about it being interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's like a cat and mouse game, you know?
Our immune system's job is to recognize and, get rid of invaders, right? Like HMPV.
Right.
But this virus, it's got a few tricks up its sleeve.
So it's not just like sitting there passively. It's actively fighting back against our immune system.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of its tactics is that it can actually interfere with the production of interferon.
Interferon. Okay, remind me what that is again.
So interferon, it's this key signaling molecule that helps our cells, coordinate an antiviral response.
Right. It's like the alarm system.
Exactly. And HMPV can, it can basically suppress interferon production. So it's weakening our initial defenses.
So it's like jamming our communication system.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
No wonder our immune system has such a hard time, putting up a good fight right away. But our bodies don't just give up, do they? What else is our immune system doing to try and take this virus down?
Well, once that initial interferon response is, compromised, our immune system has to rely on other players, like natural killer cells and T cells.
Okay, I remember those from our other deep dives.
Right. So natural killer cells, they're like the first responders, they quickly identify and eliminate those infected cells.
Okay.
And then the T cells, those are more specialized. They target specific viral proteins and they help to clear the infection.
So it's like a multi-pronged attack.
Exactly. All these different immune cells working together to try and get rid of the virus.
That's pretty amazing, actually. But if our immune system is fighting back, why do we still end up feeling so crummy?
Well, it's because that inflammatory response, the one that's triggered by the virus, it's supposed to help clear the infection, but it can also cause damage to our own tissues.
It's like friendly fire.
Yeah, kind of. It's like imagine a demolition crew trying to, take down a building. Sometimes there's going to be debris and, some destruction in the process.
So our own immune response is part of the problem.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And then to make matters even more complicated, we've got those reinfections. Why doesn't our immune system seem to remember this virus and just stop us from getting sick again?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It seems like for some reason the immune memory that we develop after an HMPV infection, it just isn't as robust or long-lasting as with other viruses. It's like our immune system just has a hard time remembering this particular foe.
Man, that's frustrating. It makes you wonder if we'll ever be able to create a really effective vaccine if our own immune systems can't even remember this thing.
It's definitely a challenge, but researchers are, they're working hard to try and figure out how this immune response works and why it seems to be less effective against HMPV. And unlocking those mysteries, that could be the key to, to developing better vaccines and treatments, ones that can really outsmart the virus and give us that lasting protection.
Let's hope so. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. HMPV's history, its sneaky tactics, those challenges it throws at our immune system, and of course, all those efforts to develop, treatments and vaccines. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways you want our listener to remember about this often overlooked virus?
I think the most important thing to remember is that even though, HMPV often just causes those mild cold-like symptoms, it's not something to be, brushed aside, especially for those who are more likely to have serious complications.
It's a reminder that we can't just focus on the big name viruses.
Right.
We've got to be aware of these under the radar threats too.
Absolutely. And even though we don't have a specific treatment for it yet, there's definitely hope on the horizon, with those vaccine candidates being developed.
Fingers crossed for those, for sure.
Yeah.
But for now, we can all do our part to, prevent the spread of HMPV by just practicing good hygiene and, of course, staying home when we're sick.
Exactly. Those simple things can really make a difference.
They can. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned a ton about HMPV and viruses in general.
It's a reminder that there's always something new to discover, especially in that microscopic world.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listener for joining us on this deep dive into human metapneumovirus. We hope you learned something new today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy.